So Earl Spencer walks into Westminster carrying a leather portfolio that apparently contains decades of sealed family correspondence, and within hours the entire narrative around the royal succession has completely flipped. That's where this story gets genuinely strange, because the timeline of how these documents surfaced, how they got into parliamentary hands, and who actually wrote the marginal notes on them doesn't line up with anything the palace has officially acknowledged. King Charles is now facing what might be the most serious institutional crisis of his reign. And the weirdest part is that the documents allegedly corroborating a plot against Prince William were never supposed to leave a vault in Northamptonshire. So let's actually walk through what happened, because when you look at what was said versus what the records show, the contradictions start piling up fast. Before we get into the details, if you enjoy breaking down royal family drama with actual timelines and receipts, hit subscribe to my channel so you don't miss the next update. It helps the channel. And honestly, the story is moving so fast that missing one development means missing the whole thread. So the first thing that jumps out is that Earl Spencer, Diana's younger brother, does not typically hand over private family archives to state bodies without a formal legal summon. That's not speculation. That's just how the Spencer family has operated for centuries. The author of a state archive is one of the most carefully guarded private collections in the country. So when he walked into that parliamentary inquiry with a worn brown leather portfolio tucked under his arm, the immediate question was not what was in the documents, but why now and why voluntarily? The answer that emerged is actually more interesting than the documents themselves. Detectives executing a separate warrant on a former state secretary's London flat had uncovered photographic copies of the Allorp letters hidden inside a desk drawer. The police seized those copies and notified Spencer, which prompted him to bring the original master documents directly to Westminster to ensure their authenticity was not disputed. That detail matters because it means the leak did not originate from Spencer himself. Someone inside the administrative network had already copied those letters years ago, and they were sitting in a drawer waiting to be found. That raises a whole separate question about who wanted them discovered and who was panicking enough to leave physical evidence in a flat that could be raided. The portfolio itself contained typewritten letters and estate memos dated between 1995 and 2003. Those documents had supposedly remained locked inside the Allure vault for over 2 decades. And yet the certified delivery receipt Spencer showed to the committee clerk was dated just 2 days before his appearance. The Metropolitan Police Evidence Unit stamp was on it. So the chain of custody goes like this: original documents in Althor Vault, photographic copies made at some unknown point, copies hidden in a former employee's flat. Police find copies during a raid. Police notify Spencer. Spencer brings originals to Westminster. That timeline does not suggest a spontaneous development. It suggests someone had been sitting on those copies for years, and the raid simply forced the issue into the open. Now here's where it gets even more tangled. The memos outlined administrative strategies developed by senior court officials to manage public perception during periods of intense royal friction. That phrase, manage public perception, is doing a lot of heavy lifting. According to the documents, there were formal proposals to reduce Prince William's operational budget by 20% over 3 consecutive years starting around 2011. The stated justification was administrative restructuring. The hidden objective, according to a handwritten margin notes, was to restrict the prince's public engagements and limit his growing influence across national youth charities. When you actually look at what was implemented between 2011 and 2014, several key aides working within William's office experienced sudden budget freezes and delayed project approvals. Other departments maintained their funding without interruption. That's not a general austerity measure. That's targeted resource restriction dressed up as fiscal responsibility. What makes this more than just a historical curiosity is the signature block on the policy directive. The co-signatures included the Queen's private secretary and a senior legal advisor who officially worked under the direct jurisdiction of the sovereign's private office. Bureaucratic lines of authority within the palace normally prevented cross-departmental interference of this nature. But when investigators cross-referenced the signature with personnel transfer logs recovered from the police raid, they found that the legal advisor had been moonlighting as an unofficial liaison between Clarence House and external media consultants. That's the connection that turns us from internal palace politics into something much larger. The policy to sideline Prince William was not a localized office dispute. It was a coordinated administrative strategy backed by senior figures across multiple royal households. And then there's the meeting. The documents reference a closed door meeting held at a private country club in Berkshire on November 12, 2012. The meeting list included 2 prominent national newspaper editors alongside the royal administrative director. The hotel reservation receipts and phone billing records confirmed that the tab for the private dining room was paid directly using an expense account linked to the Clarence House discretionary fund. So you have palace funds being used to host national newspaper editors at a private club, and the subject of that meeting, according to the documents, was the future of the crown. That's not a casual lunch. That's an operational meeting between palace officials and media executives funded through a discretionary account. At a time when William's budget was being systematically reduced, the pattern is hard to ignore. Now, the question everyone keeps asking is how King Charles could have been unaware of any of this. The private office of the sovereign is responsible for reviewing high administrative briefs before they reach the monarch's desk. Day-to-day operations are managed by the private secretary and senior advisors, but the memos outlining strategies to restrict William's budgets between 2010 and 2014 never crossed the king's desk during that period. They were intercepted and filed away by a lower-level administrative committee before reaching executive oversight. That's a massive blind spot at the center of the oil administration. And the explanation for how the documents leaked without leaving an electronic audit trail is honestly the most concerning part. The files were accessed through an external terminal registered to a defunct advisory board that was dissolved in 2015. Someone used an old, unmonitored administrative backdoor to siphon copies of the files directly to external recipients years prior, keeping the active palace servers clean of any illicit data transfers. That's not a mistake. That's infrastructure built for concealment. The recent memo that landed on Charles's desk just 3 weeks ago adds another layer. It outlined a contingency plan to transfer certain royal estate properties directly to a state-managed trust if the ongoing parliamentary inquiry resulted in criminal indictments against senior household staff. The distribution list included 3 active cabinet ministers alongside the personal secretary's private cipher. So government ministers were receiving operational updates on royal succession planning behind closed doors, and the sovereign was not in the loop. When Charles instructed Sir Edward to summon the cabinet secretary to Windsor Castle immediately, the response was that the cabinet secretary was already in London and could be at the castle gates within 45 minutes. That detail suggests the government was prepared for the summons before it was issued. The whole thing feels less like a crisis response and more like a choreographed sequence. Meanwhile, William's response was completely different in tone and strategy. While Buckingham Palace remained silent and Clarence House isolated itself, William's legal team filed an emergency injunction through the High Court of Justice that froze all remaining discretionary assets and property transfers linked to the administrative network named in Spencer's archive. The injunction bypassed traditional palace arbitration channels entirely. By filing directly through the civil courts, William's team short-circuited the attempts by rogue officials to quietly reassign estate properties before the parliamentary inquiry reached its final conclusions. The decryption keys that allowed investigators to access the secondary offshore accounts came from the principal accountant who had confessed at Scotland Yard during a second round of police interviews. Those keys gave investigators direct access to the digital ledger, tracking every unauthorized transfer executed by the administrative faction. The decrypted data revealed a direct financial link between the succession plot memos and the hidden offshore accounts. The funds used to finance the negative media campaigns against William's office had been drawn straight from estate maintenance reserves. The financial embezzlement and the political smear campaign were funded by the exact same source. That's the detail that really makes this feel less like family drama and more like institutional corruption. The money that was supposed to maintain royal estates was being funneled into offshore accounts and then used to fund media campaigns designed to undermine the future king. And the same administrative network that managed the money was also managing the narrative. When William's team identified 12 active staff members still employed within the Clarence House administrative wing after the initial police raids, the personnel renewal stamps showed the signatures belonged to a junior undersecretary who had been quietly reassigned to a regional office in Scotland 2 days after the scandal broke. The network was not dead. It was repositioning its key players away from London to evade the expanding scope of the judicial investigation. William's response was to expand the injunction to cover every regional administrative office across the United Kingdom. No safe harbors. That's a calculated legal countermeasure, not a reactive statement. And then there's the archive itself. Earl Spencer went back to the author vault and pulled out notebooks kept by the 9th Earl Spencer with handwritten labels and black ink from 1984. The notebooks contain notes dated October 12, 1998, detailing secret meetings between senior royal advisors and newspaper executives regarding public perception strategies for the young princes. The notes recorded specific dates, names of participating officials, and explicit instructions on how to handle press inquiries concerning estate funding divisions. A small folded index card tucked into the back cover of one notebook was written in Spencer's late father's handwriting. It stated that these specific notes had been removed from a government filing cabinet in Whitehall during the autumn of 1999 to protect family members from targeted political retaliation. So the historical documents had been preserved as an insurance policy against future institutional attacks. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's a family archive documenting exactly what was happening. The final page of the 1998 notebook had a clean horizontal tear across the center. The bottom half of the sheet was completely missing. Spencer checked the adjacent pages for carbon transfer marks or indentation impressions left by a pen nib. He pressed a soft lead pencil against a blank sheet of paper and rubbed it gently across the wooden table surface beneath where the page had rested. Faint outlines of letters began to emerge through the graphite shading. The word visible on the impression was a surname belonging to a former Lord Chancellor who had served during the late 90s. So the missing half of that page likely contained a name or instruction that someone went to great lengths to remove from the historical record. The fact that Spencer could recover part of it through simple graphite rubbing suggests the removal was hasty, not careful. Outside Buckingham Palace, the public responses escalated. 300 protesters pushed against police barriers. Sirens wailed. A protester hoisted a cardboard sign reading, "Absolute accountability now." 3 separate anti-monarchy groups called for an emergency constitutional convention in Trafalgar Square. The Labour and Liberal Democrat parties held an emergency meeting in Whitehall to discuss whether to introduce a parliamentary motion for a comprehensive review of the Sovereign Grant Act. Lawmakers who previously defended royal exemptions were now facing intense pressure from constituents to vote in favor of strict state oversight. The political consensus that protected royal funding mechanisms for decades has completely fractured. And through all of this, Buckingham Palace communications officers maintained absolute silence for 72 hours, refusing to issue even a standard holding statement. An internal palace memo leaked to the Evening News revealed that senior press aides had been locked out of their digital communication channels by order of the Lord Chamberlain. The palace administrative apparatus was paralyzed by infighting with different factions offering contradictory advice. The king's personal medical advisors recommended against the live television broadcast due to the unpredictable nature of the ongoing police investigations and the risk of contradicting active court proceedings. The Crown was legally gagged by its own legal counselors to prevent prejudicing the pending criminal trials of former staff members. That silence was interpreted by the public as a sign of weakness and institutional guilt. Without a reassuring voice from the throne, the vacuum was filled by speculative media reports, leaked government memos, and aggressive commentary from political opponents. The division between the monarchy and the public widened with every passing hour. And then there's the missing ledger entry. A senior parliamentary researcher discovered that a financial record in the Duchy of Cornwall dating back to 2008 recorded a multi-million-pound property transaction involving an unregistered offshore holding company. No required parliamentary disclosure signatures. The researcher flagged the anomaly and forwarded the digital file directly to the lead investigator heading the Financial Fraud Task Force at Scotland Yard. The investigation was no longer confined to Clarence House administrative files. It was digging into the ancient revenue streams of the royal estates themselves. Every corner of the financial architecture was being exposed to judicial scrutiny. So when you step back and look at the whole picture, the contradictions are everywhere. The palace claimed for years that budget reductions were standard austerity measures, but the internal memos show targeted cuts against William's office while other departments maintain full funding. The palace claimed that no one in senior leadership knew about the administrative strategies, but the signature blocks show the Queen's private secretary and a senior legal advisor were directly involved. The palace claimed that the leaks were a recent breach, but the external terminal used to access the files belonged to a defunct advisory board dissolved in 2015. The government claimed to be cooperating with the sovereign, but cabinet ministers were receiving operational updates on succession planning behind the king's back. And the Spencer family archive, which supposedly had no connection to current events, turned out to contain a missing page that someone physically tore out of a notebook, leaving behind an indentation that revealed the surname of a former Lloyd Chancellor. The deeper implication is that this was never just about Camilla or a personal feud. The documents suggest an institutional playbook refined over 30 years using administrative pressure and media influence to manage the succession. The financial corruption and the narrative manipulation were funded from the same source. The people who were supposed to be managing royal estates were instead managing public opinion against the future king. And the only reason any of this came to light is that someone got sloppy, left photographic copies in a flat, and a police raid on an unrelated warrant happened to find them. That's not a master plan coming together. That's a cover-up falling apart. The crown is now caught between the demands of public accountability and the weight of centuries-old tradition. William's legal team is moving through the courts with precision. Charles is summoning cabinet secretaries to Windsor Castle. Buckingham Palace is silent. Clarence House is isolated. The parliamentary inquiry is expanding, and the public is outside the gates with signs demanding answers. The institution that survived wars, abdications, and scandals is now facing something it has never really had to confront before: a complete loss of control over its own internal narrative. The documents are out, the archives are open, the receipts are on the table, and the one thing everyone keeps asking is the simplest question of all: who authorized the transfer of douche funds into an external account without the required signatures? The answer to that question might be the one that finally forces the monarchy to choose between reform and collapse. But there's one more layer that hasn't been fully explored yet, and it involves the timing of Spencer's appearance itself. Parliamentary records show that the committee had originally scheduled a routine procedural hearing for that morning, something completely unrelated to royal finances. Spencer was not on the witness list. His name did not appear on any public agenda. And yet, when he arrived at the security checkpoint, his parliamentary pass had already been pre-authorized through a back-channel request filed by an unnamed clerk in the records office. That clerk had apparently processed the authorization at 6:40 in the morning, hours before the building officially opened. The security log shows the pass was printed and waiting at the front desk under a code that had not been used since 2019. So someone inside Westminster knew Spencer was coming before Spencer himself had even confirmed his travel plans. That means the decision to bring the documents forward was not entirely his own. The leak, The raid, the pre-authorized pass, the timing of the committee hearing, it all fits together like a sequence that had been quietly assembled in advance. The only question is whether Spencer was the one pulling the thread or whether someone else was pulling him. And that brings us back to the former estate secretary whose London flat was raided. She had not worked at all since 2016. Her employment records show she left under a confidentiality agreement that included a clause preventing her from retaining any physical copies of estate correspondence, but the photographic copies found in her desk drawer were not recent prints. Forensic analysis dated the photographic paper to 2014, meaning she had been sitting on those images for over a decade. Neighbors described her as reclusive, rarely leaving the flat, and consistently paying her rent through a third-party account registered to a solicitor in Geneva. That solicitor's name appears again in the margin notes of the 1998 notebooks, not as a participant in the meetings, but as a witness to a separate financial arrangement involving a trust fund established for the maintenance of Spencer family archives. So, the same legal network that helped preserve the archive was also connected to the person who leaked its contents. The entire chain of custody is contaminated by overlapping relationships that make it nearly impossible to separate family loyalty from institutional manipulation. The palace has not commented on any of these new revelations, and given the legal constraints, it probably won't. But the silence is no longer being interpreted as strategic caution. It is being read as structural paralysis. Every day without an official statement allows another leaked document, another forensic finding, another parliamentary leak to define the story. The monarchy has lost the initiative, and the people who are now shaping the narrative are not the ones sitting in the palace briefing room. They are the investigators, the archivists, the researchers, and the family members who decided that the only way to protect the institution was to expose the machinery that had been quietly corrupting it from within. The question is no longer whether the palace can manage the story. The question is whether the palace can survive the story that is already out.